All right, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Freedom State podcast. Today's guest is Newton Chang. Newton is the Director of Health and Wellbeing for Google. He is also a multiple world-time powerlifting champion. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thomas, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me as your first guest. What an honor. Yeah, let's do this. I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. So I did some research into you, Newton. This first question might creep you out because I did do a little deep dive, but
You creep away. Let's go.
let's set the tone. The year was 1996, and a young kid named Newton Chang was in Macomb, Illinois, graduating Macomb High School, the school of the bombers. He then ended up as the director of health and well-being for Google. Can you share a bit about your personal journey and how you overcame anxiety and depression on your way to what most people would consider the pinnacle of corporate America?
Sure. So I'll talk first about kind of like the steps in that journey, and then let's go into depression, anxiety, and overcoming it, because I want to dig into that and maybe reframe it a little bit, and like, let's say, like, what does it really look like to, some people say they overcome it. I think about it a little differently. So if you had told that kid, hey, someday you're going to be director of health and performance at Google, a few things would come up. It would, he'd say, what the heck is Google? And you'd explain, like, that's a multi-trillion-dollar company, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And that kid would have assumed, like, wait, aren't I going to become a doctor or engineer? Because that was the plan. It was like, we're going to go to college. My parents told me, like, here are your options. It's doctor, although the healthcare system is getting pretty complex. So engineering will, give you optionality, and there's going to be a good job market there. And so I didn't really have a vision for what I really wanted to do. But what I did know was my parents are doctors. I highly respected them. I saw the good they were doing in the community. And I said, that looks like a good life. So maybe I could do that. On the engineering side, I knew I loved consumer technology. I thought being an electrical engineer might help me participate that and build some cool stuff. And so I said, okay, let's go explore. I quickly honed in on the electrical engineering path. I honestly, what happened was I got to organic chemistry in my pre-medicine requirements. It was scheduled really early in the morning, and I was too lazy to get up. And so I dropped the class and just said, let's focus on engineering for now. Like, this is the line of thinking of a 18-year-old, like at least an 18-year-old me. Like, let's just be honest. Like, I didn't make I wasn't thinking very critically. So fast forward, I graduated as an engineer. I actually worked for a great company that was a partner of Sony, and I worked on the PlayStation 3 for about 5 years before its launch. And while it was like really technically challenging, and I had all these great coworkers who, like, they were top of their fields and I was learning a lot from them, it made it really clear that I was in the wrong field. I'm like, hey, you're surrounded by these all-stars. Why aren't you inspired? Like, why don't you want to grow to be them? And it wasn't them, it was me. Like, I was in the wrong place. What I didn't know was I always had a strong interest in exercise and health and fitness. So I started exploring on the side there, like taking classes, reading books, and eventually becoming a certified personal trainer. And what I found was just doing that as side work, I found it incredibly fulfilling, but it quickly became clear, like, hey, this will not scale. Like, one-on-one personal training, this won't scale, and that's not the type of impact I want to have. So from there, I started looking around saying, like, hey, where could you do this at scale? And this is like now, let's say 2005. At this time, you first had companies like Google appearing on the scene, where they were investing a lot more in the health and well-being of their employees. And so I saw this, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. There's something new in society where large employers, they want to support the health and well-being of their employees. Employees want better quality of life. So there's no things like selling fitness products, memberships, supplements here to get someone into the fitness ecosystem. And so I said, okay, I want to find a way into that world. I went to business school to learn more about how business works. Um, we can debate about whether I actually learned that or not, even though I loved the experience. And then coming out of that, I found this role as fitness operations manager at Google, where my job was to scale some of their fitness services for employees, first across North America. Then from there, it expanded internationally. Then I started to oversee other programs. To fast forwarding, let's see, maybe about 12 years into my career, I became director of health and performance at Google, where I oversaw fitness, a variety of recovery programs and stress management programs, and a whole portfolio of various health promotion programs to get people to participate in living a healthy lifestyle in ways that support them being at their best in all the most important roles in their life, whether that be at work or at home. And so that's where we're at now. Now, before I go on and pivot into depression and anxiety, uh, anything you want to dig into?
I think that's an amazing journey, and I like how everything happens for a reason. You don't just stumble into something and realize like, oh, this was the exact plan I made and that's how it's going to go. Like, you just end up somewhere, roll with the punches, and go on to the next thing. And I appreciate that you noted that you don't learn everything about business from business school. Like, a lot of it is really just getting into the nitty gritty. It is super expensive to go to business school, and I don't know if the actual hands-on experience is quite noted there. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it was, if just a quick note on that, I think when I took within business school, I took a class in entrepreneurship that was great. And what that did was, it didn't teach me to be an entrepreneur, but it helped me understand the difference of like, oh, if I go get this MBA, I'm going to come out with like a pretty good, at least theoretical understanding of, for a big machine, like a large corporation, how do some of the parts have to work together? The entrepreneurs, I was like, oh, you guys, guys and ladies have to be fearless hustlers. Like you have to be like so creative, so brave, and so persistent. And that scares the shit out of me. And I think I'm going to go into the big machine for a while before I consider that journey. So just a note on business school versus, building a business. There was a difference there. So let's go into depression and anxiety. So my career at Google had gone really, really well. In January 2022, by then I had gotten to a pretty bad place in terms of mental health. I was clearly showing up more terse with my family. I was getting more and more exhausted. I actually broke out crying in a team meeting in front of my vice president and all my peers.
Wow.
And so it was just clear something was wrong. And so I'll go back before that. So I work in this area of health and well-being, and I'm world's champion powerlifter. And so it was clear, like, wait a minute, I have all the expertise. I have access to amazing services, and I'm still in a bad place. And because I work in this field, I know how many other people are struggling just like me. So November 2021, before I went on leave, I was scheduled to give a keynote at a Google Health and Wellbeing conference. And I had this plan of talking about the amazing intersections between Google technology and opportunities in health and well-being. And knowing how many were struggling just like me, I made a last-second decision. I threw my entire script out, and I told the audience that I had long been struggling with depression and anxiety, and I'd soon be going on mental health leave. And even though like I wanted to show up as like the fancy, successful thought leader, if we were going to position ourselves as leaders in the field of health and well-being, we all knew that data, and that's what we needed to be talking about. So that was like kind of like a big defining moment for me, where I'm like, I put this out there, I cannot take it back. And so after that, I went on mental health leave in January of 2022. Now you might ask, like, okay, you had all the expertise, shouldn't you have kept yourself from getting to a bad place? So I think it was around fall 2021 where I finally found the right therapist who worked really well with me, and he put me through an assessment, um, just an intake assessment that you'll do with people seeking support for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, so according to this, you have major symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I was completely taken aback. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I still perform at this level. Um, I've never been diagnosed with struggles with mental health. Like, how is this possible? And he said, well, you said yes to all these things on the questionnaire, like things like struggling to get out of bed, loss of, inability to feel joy and things that used to bring you joy, irritability, etc. And I said, well, isn't this just what it's like to work hard? And his response was, yes, but it's also depression and anxiety. And then this is the big aha. I said, but I felt like this off and on since high school. And so that was my big aha of like, oh crap. Like I've been carrying this for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no awareness of what uh, mental health struggles looked or felt like for someone like me.
Mm-hmm.
I had no vocabulary around it. And so I had just been like soldiering on. Now, one thing that I read recently that it's specific to Asian American populations, but it actually resonates with a lot of people who have found a way to just persist and perform regardless of how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a book called Where I Belong by a group called the Yellow Chair Collective that supports mental health for Asian Americans. And they said they were exploring why do mental health struggles go undiagnosed with so many Asian Americans. And what they said was, well, for a lot of people, you would look for red flags like, oh, they are letting their hygiene go. They've stopped
Mm-hmm.
showing up for commitments. They are dropping, their work performance is going down. Unless you are Asian American, because if you were raised by, say, immigrant parents, it's very possible that you would rather die than have any of those things happen. So you like just push all that down and say, hell no, I'm going to keep going. And you can end up driving yourself into the ground for literally decades.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been taught like, yeah, suck it up. This is just what life is like. And so I moved forward with depression and anxiety for decades, assuming this is just what it's like. And the worst thing you can do is slow down and stop.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for
I'm
being
guessing
so
like,
open and
yeah.
brave for sharing this.
Yeah, I'm guessing like the reason even though I frame it as Asian American, like every time I tell an audience that,
Mm-hmm.
some Asian Americans come up to me afterwards and say like, I felt exactly that same way. A lot of non-Asian Americans show up and say, I felt exactly that same way.
Yeah. And I think I'm so glad you did the Asian American perspective and also the men perspective, really, because lots of my peers, especially, are men, and not many of them are very comfortable talking about this stuff. In fact, like they'll laugh it off and like what you did for decades, right? Just push it down and say, no, I'm going to keep going. But eventually it's going to
Yeah.
creep up and dig back into your life, whether you want it to or not. So, yeah, thanks for opening up about that.
Yeah. One of the reasons I speak out is if I think about, I think maybe this is a me thing but I think it's a human thing. So when I came
Mm-hmm.
back from mental health leave and I was like, I think I need to open up and speak up. And I started looking for, okay, I want someone who looks like me. And when I say looks like, what I meant was I actually see more women opening up about their mental health struggles. I see more people from the LGBTQ community opening up about their struggles. I see some people of color who are not Asian opening up about their struggles. So I'm like, okay, I need to find a senior straight male leader in tech, like someone who like really understands what my life might feel like, who's opened up and like how they navigate this. And I couldn't find one. And so it was like two things. Like the first thought was like, well, shit, like well, what do I do? But then second was, if I believe that I'm a leader and I want to drive change, you kind of see like, oh, this is unexplored territory for this segment. Like very few have gone here, but it's really clear we need people going here and opening up, especially for men, like you were saying. And so that, even though it was incredibly scary, that also motivated me to say, hey, this is your work to do. You have to go do this.
Wow. I can relate 100% with that. In looking around, there aren't a whole lot of men talking about it openly, and even less leaders that are actually trying to pave the way for getting people to open up. And that's a big reason why I'm starting Freedom State. I see a lot of myself in you, actually. Like, there's not many people, even businesses, trying to build like a community of people who are going through similar things, and many of them are ambitious and have really big dreams for their life and feel that it's holding them back. And if there's not people paving the way, then a lot of them just sit on the sidelines and feel like it's not for me. But
Totally. Yeah.
yeah, and
So actually, I'd be curious to hear your experience as like a budding entrepreneur. I know things are changing, but my perception is, you may feel kind of like isolated because you're building on your own. So you might connect with people on social media, and if you look around, most of the entrepreneurs they're kind of just trying to put out this image of like, I'm building, I'm killing it, everything's going great. But then I know it's not, because that's not how the process of entrepreneurship goes. It's like
exactly.
grind, grind, grind until you find some sort of product market fit or traction. And then hopefully it's enough traction to be profitable. And if not, like, then you kill the thing and you start over. Like, that doesn't sound awesome.
I think people are getting fed up of seeing the bros on Instagram posting pictures with their Lambos that they probably rented. And I think, yeah, people just don't buy into it, for one thing, and they like there's a big shift happening where people want to see real people opening up about their daily lives. Like even vlogs, like where people film their everyday lives. Those are huge right now because, well, even after the epidemic, the whole world kind of shut down for a little while. Like people were forced to stay home, and all the all the things that when we're busy day to day, we don't think about. And then when we have to kind of take pause and we're forced into our own thoughts, I think these things come up a lot. And in the entrepreneur perspective, though, starting an online business, very lonely, I think. And you have to really be on the bottom for quite a long time before you start to see any traction. And that's part of the people who I have grown a support network through, I have met online. And that has helped a lot because there's so many people who are trying to start businesses right now. And they're even afraid to tell anybody. Like friends and family are one thing, but like openly bringing it up in conversation, it's like they're shying away. And I did that for a while too. And now that I'm reaching out to, and trying to connect with new people, even like this podcast right now, it's just amazing. Like it gives you motivation and makes you feel more seen and less alone in the world. Because yeah, it's a daily grind and it can be scary. Like a lot of highly sensitive people, which I just took this questionnaire and found out that I am one of the highly sensitive people who they just tend to feel things more, tend to have more of an intuitive, like emotional side, which again isn't common traits of men or like the ideals that media have posted for men. But there's so many that are like me and who have these traits, and I think honestly it's a superpower if you want to go and start a business where you're trying to connect people, because yeah, it's
Totally.
you're talking from a not a showy like bro Instagram side, but like hey, I'm a person, you're a person, let's connect.
It's interesting. I really like how you frame that as like a superpower. So similar to you, I've done some of the highly sensitive person assessments. Those don't tell me I'm a highly sensitive person.
Sure.
But I remember my wife and I go to marriage counseling, and we're talking to our counselor, and at some point he just offhandedly says like, well, you're a really sensitive person. And I go like, what? Like, how dare you? I am a stoic, straight Asian male. Like, how is that possible? And then when when I started thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, I did get pretty reactive to all these things that you pointed out.
Mhm.
And so that was my aha. I'm like, okay, like there was a whole identity thing blocking me from actually seeing who I am and how I show up. And then the second thing was like you framed it as a superpower, and I think about, well, what has made you successful at work? And I'm like, I'm actually, especially at a place like Google, like I'm not the smartest, but I'm really good at sensing how within like a group of people, like how everyone's doing and who needs checking in on, who
Mhm.
needs like a certain type of care. And so the feedback I get a lot is, I don't know why, but things go better when you're there. So I want
Yeah.
you in this room. And that's really hard to put on a performance review or a job description,
Yeah.
but it's like it keeps the demand for me being there going. I'm like, okay, I can't define this, but if this many smart people are finding just my presence and how I show up valuable, then yeah, that's a superpower. And as we go into the unknown era of AI, like I think it becomes a more valuable superpower.
Mhm. The intangible factor, like the X factor almost. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's like how
completely
we
relate.
connect with one another.
Try and put an algorithm on that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's going to take at least 5 years for them to figure out.
At least.
Maybe eight.
All right. I'd love to shift into your powerlifting life because that's a really big part of who you are, right?
Yeah,
So as someone who's excelled in powerlifting, how do you see the parallels between physical strength and mental resilience in navigating business challenges and corporate world?
yeah. I think powerlifting, it started as something fun for me,
Mhm.
and then at some point, it's still really fun. But when I started, I was married but had no kids. I had less job responsibilities, so it was a way for me to hang out and lift big weights with my friends.
Yeah.
Like that's just fun. Eventually, like I had kids, I got busier. I didn't want to let go of the powerlifting, so you start optimizing your life. And next thing you know, the only time you're training is either alone in a dark garage at 5 a.m. at the gym when there's no one else there. Like there's maybe like the other lone middle-aged guy he looks as haggard as you do and he doesn't want to talk. So it becomes like this day to day, this very lonely pursuit. And so you start looking at these things and say, hey, if I'm going to hold on to this and keep it in my life, um, you ask like, why is this meaningful? But you can also infuse these things with meaning. So I think of it more like you mine these activities for meaning. When you do that, they become meaningful. Um, and so I look at it as many things, but one is it's a practice of mastery for me. Where if I now take it to the analogy to business, just doing a powerlifting program, like you have no guaranteed results,
Mhm.
but but I must do at least do the program. That's the only chance I have of getting results. Like not doing the program will definitely not get me results.
Sure.
So it is this very tangible example of you must trust the process. You must keep going and hope that results will reveal themselves in the future.
Mhm.
And so it's for me become this allegory of you know um, things like building a business. As I start to do more public speaking and teaching workshops around mental health, um, I have to say like, okay, what is the program? Like, what are the things that I need to do? I need to refine my offerings, whether those are talks or workshops. I need to find leads. I need to reach out to those leads regularly. I got to do the reps. I have to keep going even if I'm getting rejections. Like the outcomes are not
Absolutely.
coming, but you got to keep going. Um, I have to convert. I got to deliver, and then after I deliver, I got to get feedback and figure out how to make this better. And
Mhm.
then I just got to keep going.
That's
And it's
great.
like
Yeah.
that's exactly what I'm doing in the gym.
Yeah. Do you find it helps to like compare the two, or are they two very separate things? Like, do you find that since I succeeded with this thing, like the powerlifting thing, and I did all of these steps, am are you able to like transfer that into your life, or is it just, does it give you confidence to move forward?
I am. So it's almost like I don't have a choice but to compare the two things. So
Right.
there's this book called The Book of Five Rings,
Hmm.
and it's by this guy named, are you familiar with it?
I'm not, no, but I will be looking it up right
Oh,
after this.
okay. It's a little weird. Like, why do business people keep reading this? And
Hmm.
so it's by this old Japanese swordsman named Miyamoto Musashi. And so
Hmm.
it's big in the martial arts circles, and now it's bridging into things like people who are interested in business and performance psychology. And one of the things he says is he references the knowing 10,000 things by knowing one thing really well. And
Mm.
so it's almost like
Mm.
whether I want to draw analogies to powerlifting or not, I've been doing so much powerlifting that that's my operating system now. Like
Yeah.
that is, I got a firmware update whether I wanted to or not. So everything looks like powerlifting. And so I'm like, well, if I know that really well, I can transfer whatever's going on in life into the frameworks that I understand really, really well, which are a lot around powerlifting, and use those to turn complexity into something simple that I can turn into a system or a process, and then I can execute. And then
Yeah.
conversely, I do a lot of things like, within my job, we think a lot about complexity theory and things like that, working in a large organization or working on large systemic problems like mental health. And I take those back into powerlifting
Hmm.
because that's also like a complexity problem. Like you don't just do the reps and get linearly stronger, or
Right.
we'd all be bench pressing 1,000 pounds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, eventually it's like it tops out, but you got to find ways to make progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like how you, the reference you made, where you do, like learn one thing really well and then you know how to do a thousand things. I think that's really important for people who are struggling, especially with their anxiety and depression, where they feel like they can't do anything. They're like deadlocked, and just start something simple like powerlifting. Of course, there's lots of technique to it, but it's something relatively inexpensive to get started in. And it's just little things like that that once you get confident in it, you almost get some like momentum to move on to the next thing or what you actually truly want to do. So starting simple like that and building up is gonna get you where you want to go eventually.
Yeah, maybe an analogy would be like great if you're in something like powerlifting that helps you build your physical, mental, spiritual
Hmm.
strength. But if I think about, I don't know what your audience might be, but let me assume that there might be a lot of young males in society right now who maybe they want to build something, but they're stuck. I'm going to guess there's a high number of them that play video games. If I think about video games, I'm like, okay, I know sometimes we say video games, you're just wasting your life away. Maybe, depends how far you go. But if I think about like the amount of skill that a freaking video game today, like especially the console ones, takes,
Yes.
it's massive. It's insane. Um, and if you look at the design of the games, it gives you kind of like some clues as to like, oh, and why do I stick to this? Why do I feel flow when I do this?
Hmm.
And how could I build that into like the systems that I need to do to build a business? Like, how do I make it fun? There's another podcaster slash YouTuber, Ali Abdal.
Hmm.
He's pretty huge right now. He just wrote a book called Feel Good Productivity that I think he doesn't speak specifically about video games, but he is a gamer.
Right.
He talks a lot about how do you make work feel good,
Hmm.
and by really exploring that, that's how he's been able to get so much done and be so successful. So I think more young men have a pretty interesting like firmware update in their brain from video games that they
Hmm.
could definitely start leveraging today.
I completely agree with that. There can be like there's a PhD amount of level of information and frameworks you can work with in a video game, whether it's strategies or my brother's a big
Yeah.
gamer, so I can completely see that. And
Yeah.
he's using it like you just said. The stuff he's learning in his games, he's finding actually relate to business. So he's starting his own business now because of that. So you're onto
Oh,
something there.
is he? is he going to be a guest on your podcast? I would love to hear how he thinks about that.
You know what? He's pretty easy to book. We live in the same place, so I'll see what I can do, Newton. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll get him on. All right, I'm gonna move on to you adopted two daughters, which is absolutely amazing and I'm sure a profound life experience. How has fatherhood influenced your approach to work and your understanding of the importance of holistic well-being?
Yeah, this is a place where I'm having a lot of philosophical debate with
Yep.
myself right now. So I just got back from a business trip this week where within my department they gathered all we're going through a lot of like pretty dramatic change, and so they gathered all the senior leaders to just get in a room and start talking about, hey, like where are we at as people, as leaders, how do we navigate this together. And early on we tried to do some discussions just to make sure we're seeing each other as humans. And so like they asked how many people here are parents or caregivers of aging parents, and almost all the hands went up. And I'm looking around and I'm like, wow, like, so we're all just quietly carrying that while being senior leaders in this organization. It's a lot. And I think it might be that recently, like my sister, her kids are 14 and they're wonderful and they're loving and they're kind. But you can start to see, like, as teenagers, they got to go their own way. So they're kind of starting to pull away. And that, honestly, that's scaring the shit out of me, because I'm like looking at my daughter who's 6 and I'm like, okay, if you're on their timeline, at best I got 8 years still, you start to pull away from me. If you're a little more strong-headed, and she is incredibly strong-headed, maybe you only got 6 years.
Oh no.
And so I'm looking at these two things where I'm like, I love my job, it pays really well, it supports the family.
Mhm.
I am losing precious years with my daughter. Those are infinitely valuable. And there's no easy trade-off here. Like, I'm the only one who can choose how I want to split this time.
Yeah.
Like, no one can do that for me. And I can't just yell at my company to say, like, I need more flexibility. I'm like, I know what the job was. Like, I took this senior position. Like, you made it pretty clear it was going to be hard.
Mhm.
So I'm taking the paycheck. I need to be in integrity with my values and my duties to this role. I also see this infinitely valuable time with both my daughters, like, slowly slipping away. And so that's how I feel about it right now. Now, in terms of what I do about it, it's interesting. Like, I am taking a lot of chances at work to the point where it's raising eyebrows, if I'm honest. Like, for example, I was in a meeting once with a bunch of the VPs of my company, and I'm like, I have no solutions for getting out of childcare right now, so I'm just going to have to do this. So I call into this meeting. I have my earbuds in, and I'm getting my 2-year-old daughter up, and I, I had to, like, text my coworker and say, like, I'm really sorry, I can't do the presentation of the work that I oversee. Can you do the update?
Mhm.
And she was awesome. She stepped in. And so as she's going through this, she just says, I still have my camera off, I'm just having my earbuds in. And she says, Newton, is there anything you want to add at this point? And I unmute and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm literally wiping excrement off a child right now. Like, I cannot participate. And so I'm like, I could either hide this or I could say it out loud, because I know other people are juggling these ridiculous things as well.
Mhm.
And so I'm choosing to say these things out loud because, on the one hand, it might make it look like I don't have my shit together, but behind closed doors, all the other leaders are telling me that, like, if I don't have my shit together, neither do they. So I just want people to feel less alone. So I'm going to state, like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm wiping excrement off a child. Like, I'm sorry, I can't make this. I have to do childcare. I don't have any other options right now.
Mhm.
And I've fully discussed with my boss, like, I know this might affect how I'm perceived as a leader in both good and bad ways.
Yeah.
It might get me shut out of certain opportunities, and I am actively making that choice. But for my core responsibilities, I'll find a way to deliver. And if at some point we get into the red zone where you're like, I need to take action, just give me a heads up and we'll talk it through. But this is where we're at right now. And to his credit, he's been awesome. And to be fair, I'm pretty far along in my career, so I can take more chances.
Right.
But if I have that privilege, I feel like I need to take those chances on behalf of those who can't and model a different way of leading and living.
That risk is part of your superpower, I think, that we were talking about earlier. That like humanizing the environment that you're in. I can also relate to that. I started a job recently, and on my very first day, I was so back up a little bit. I was in a car crash in December, and I'm honestly at this point before I got this job where I was struggling the most, and I was having panic attacks and moments where I literally thought I was going to die, like heart attack moment. It was, I've never experienced it to this extent before. And so I'm starting this job, which I got so lucky to get. I didn't even apply for it. Like I was applying for a different position, got this role because I was bringing up some relevant skills that I had recently learned. And my first day, I was in my first meeting with the team, and I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. And I could either keep that inside and not open up and let them think like, why is this guy so quiet? Like, what's going on? But I took the risk, and I'm not as far in my career as you are, and opened up with my whole team and let them know like what was going on. Like I'm having like a panic attack right now. I just want to be open with you guys. I recently had a car crash, and I think this is probably a big part of what's coming up right now. And I got really nervous after I said that because it was a little quiet in the room. And all of a sudden, like everyone else starts opening up. Oh, I've been feeling really anxious too lately. And I didn't realize all these people on my team who I've known for a while, like started bringing it up.
Yeah.
And now every once in a while in like team meetings, they'll just start bringing it up. And I didn't know this before, but they had never talked about that before at work with their coworkers.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, talk about superpower. You like, we talk about it takes time to change culture. Like sometimes, like with the right catalyst who's willing to take a risk, like you've shifted the entire culture of that team, like in a really meaningful way. That's awesome. Good for you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, you ready to move on to the next?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So I and many of my fellow introverts and highly sensitive persons in my audience feel times of overwhelm about creating an online business, specifically like creating social media or engaging new customers through sales calls, etc. Setting up a routine of mindfulness, meditation, exercise, and consistent diet has literally helped me the most out of anything. Can you share your method for priming yourself to handle such stressful and extroverted things in your life?
Yeah, so let me think. There's a few levels on this. I think I won't go too much into the things that you just laid out, like regular mindfulness practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that as like before I was one of those self-judgmental meditators where I'm like, I still have racing thoughts. I'm doing it wrong. Now I think of it more like cardio.
Okay.
Where I'm like, no, you have to keep doing it. Like, and yeah, it sucks every time. Like, I'm sorry, like that's how cardio works, but it will be good for your system. And when I took that mindset and I kept at it, like it made me much more skillful with observing and intentionally deciding what to do with my thoughts. I'm like, okay, I get it now. Meditation, hopefully someday it'll feel peaceful and joyful for me. Like it's been years, it still sucks. It's still worth it. So and then aside from that, of course, there's the exercise, eating well. Sleep is kind of like the linchpin. So if sleep goes down, it takes down the entire system. And so I'm especially and sometimes it's unavoidable. We have young kids, and so I'm mindful of protecting my sleep. And when I can't, I start there of like, okay, I got to get the sleep back on track.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the ongoing habits. Now, if I think about the more tactical things that I might do related to work, um, there's a guy named Cal Newport. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a computer science professor who also does a lot of writing on productivity.
Okay.
And he, I forget what his book is, but he has a book on how he plans out his day, and then he sells a productivity planner. Like
Hmm.
he's got a pretty good side business going there. And what it does is like I follow his plan where I list out, okay, here's all the things I need to do. Here's the most important one or two things I need to do today, and prioritize from there. From there, I go to my calendar and I anchor a few things. It's like, okay, one, what are the critical meetings that must happen? Like, I work in a large organization, so some of those are not up to me. So I'm like, okay, use those as anchors.
Hmm.
Childcare anchors, like other life commitments anchors. Now the in between spaces, or well, before I go to there, I look at, are there any meetings that are not critical? And I'm going to just start declining those or
Hmm.
postponing them or shortening them. Then after that, I'm like, okay, I got this much open space. I need a few things. I need regular breaks, or else I drive myself into the ground, and that starts downward spirals. And then two, I need adequate heads down time depending on the activity. So if something on my to-do list is pretty complex, I might need at least an hour, if not more, to get into the right mindset and then for the work to start flowing. If there's like, I just need to bang out a bunch of emails, I might be able to say, okay, we'll just do 15 minutes for that. Then the last thing I do is for each of those activities, this is very much in line with, say, um, some of the productivity people like James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits.
Hmm.
Like I try to, or actually, BJ Fogg is another person that I recommend looking at. Uh, and I take the things to be done, I break them down into the smallest micro tasks I can, and then list those out. So now it's kind of like I don't have to think when I get to that time. It's like, do these things that are so clear and simple that you're almost just like a robot. And if I do all those things, then I get a shit ton done. I don't run myself into the ground, and I feel pretty good at the end of the day. Uh, I probably execute that just, you know, perfectly 25% of the time.
Hmm.
50% of the time, I do okay. And then as a parent, maybe 50% of the time, shit just goes off the rails between fires at work or fires with parenting. But I'm like, okay, but it's good to know what ideal is versus the reality. And like, let's see if we can get more ideal over time and less of the harsh reality.
Cool. I couldn't help but notice the way you were trying to you systemized your life, and it sounded a lot like you trying to, because I've worked out a lot in the past as well. It's almost like trying to optimize your performance and recovery for your physical, and that kind of sounds exactly like you're trying to do with all the other aspects of your life.
Exactly. It's very much like going back to Miyamoto Musashi. I'm like, I
Hmm.
have this firmware installed in my brain. I can do 10,000s because I know one thing well.
Exactly. That's awesome. All right. I do have a question from someone in our community. I let a couple people
Yeah.
before this podcast know, and one had a really interesting question. We kind of already touched base on it, but would it be cool to answer that one?
Oh yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Awesome. So this is coming from Studio Lampone on Instagram. I'll give her a shout out. Um, so her question was, if we didn't struggle with introverted anxiety, is it possible our art or craft that we're good at wouldn't be as powerful? What if having the anxiety or nervousness allows us to tap into our deepest potential, like the superpower we were talking about?
Oh, it absolutely does. It's kind of I've stopped I've stopped trying to label things as good or bad. So there's a old Indian philosopher. He passed away a few decades ago, but uh, Jiddu Krishnamurti is his name.
Mhm.
And when I found his stuff, it's really interesting. So you have like things from the mindfulness world where you do a mindfulness practice, you can observe your thoughts and you cultivate compassion and gratitude
Mhm.
and all these other ways of just trying to cultivate your mind. He doesn't do any of that. The way I describe him is like he's this very smart, thoughtful guy who tried to logic his way through that
Mhm.
whole path. And so one of the things he talks about is choiceless awareness, where he says the only truth is to observe your own experience with choiceless awareness. And what that means is to say, can you observe what you're experiencing without labeling it?
Mm.
So if I think about like you just said introverted anxiety,
Mhm.
struggling with introverted anxiety, I'm like, oh, there's a lot in there. And it all comes with pretty negative connotations.
Yes.
So we can decide like, well, what is actually going on? You'd say like, okay, when I am in social situations, I tend to feel physically drained. But I'd also ask, like, well, what else do you tend to do in a social situation as an introvert? Like, I'm not sure for this person, but many introverts I know is like, I also tend to observe more and more deeply than what a lot of my peers report observing.
Mhm.
I connect dots between people in ways that, and some of my peers don't. Let's pierce into anxiety, which in the way that it was framed, it was kind of like a wholesale negative,
Right.
and say, for me, anxiety, what does it feel like? It feels like a um, it feels like a rising internal energy,
Mhm.
and I'm unclear how to direct it, and I become uncomfortable. And so, like, let's call anxiety that, like, before it turns into like things like ruminating thoughts or negative self-talk or things like that. So if I just call it now undirected rising energy, with intentionality, you can do many things with that. And before, without going too far into it, because there's actually a whole fabulous book with a thought leader attached to about this. There's a woman named Maura Aarons Mealy who wrote a book called
Yes.
The Anxious Achiever,
Mhm.
where this is exactly what she talks about, where it's like turning anxiety into your superpower. It's just unharnessed energy.
Mhm.
And so the question is, how do I harness this to make it work for me?
You literally just basically stated the basis of our business and brand because you could look at these and say, oh, these are symptoms. These like add the stigma. But really, it's just what makes you unique. And you got to find the ways to build your own toolkit, for lack of a better word, to use those to your advantage, not to actually just say, oh, I have this and it sucks. Because you could
Yeah.
do that, but isn't it so much better to say, this is what makes me unique? And not everyone operates this way, so let's use that to our advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me get a little geeky for a second. Are you
Let's do
a
it.
comic book person?
No, but I appreciate it. I'm an absolute book nerd.
Okay. Like, so yeah, if you're into sci-fi, especially the ones
Hmm.
that go way into, or fantasy even, like
Yes.
where they go way into like world building and power
Hmm.
systems and things like that. So taking it back to comic books, and X-Men 97 came out on Disney Plus. So I've been rewatching that and starting to get back into old X-Men comics.
Nice.
And within X-Men, they have this universe of mutants where people grew up with strange superpowers. And sometimes they're celebrated for those, but they're also persecuted for being different. And it's kind of interesting because they've been going for so long, you might have had decades to explore a character and their powers. There's one particular character who gets bashed on named Jubilee
Hmm.
because it looks like her power is she shoots like kind of fireworks explosions out of her hands. I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's kind of lame. Like Wolverine has claws and can cut through anything and stab people. And they're like, so you do fireworks. And so that's one way of looking at it. But then I I always like going online and figuring out, like searching around me, like, well, how powerful is Jubilee actually? And the description as they've gone further into character is what looks like fireworks. They're actually mini nuclear explosions. And so as she
Wow.
grows, she learns to harness this. Like in theory, she might be one of the most powerful mutants.
Hmm.
And it's like whether you, for whatever characteristics you have, one, you get to decide whether they're a burden or a superpower. And then two, by cultivating it, you get to decide how powerful is this superpower.
Wow. That's so interesting. Like, you're not the first high achiever who I've seen connect comic books to like a hero arc in terms of themselves. Like Israel Adesanya, he's a really prized fighter in MMA
Oh yeah.
and kickboxing, and he always
Yes.
he goes a little overboard with it sometimes, but he's always comparing like his struggles and stuff to comic book and anime, and yeah, a lot of people get empowered by it. So if anyone out
Yeah.
here is listening to it and is a comic book nerd, use that to your advantage.
He's a really interesting case study because like if
Hmm.
you know he'll like if you know the anime Naruto,
Absolutely.
you know it's full of these ninjas who do these intricate like hand gestures to
Hmm.
create powers. Like he'll go in there and he's clearly learned so many of those because he's doing them like during the intros. And yeah, so you can frame him as a nerd, but you could say, how was he inspired by something like Naruto to become like a world champion mixed martial artist? Like, how much meaning can you mine out of stories? They're
Hmm.
free and they're there to inspire you. Again, you get to decide, like, are they just um, junk food for your brain, or are they inspiration that's going to turn you into a superhero?
Exactly. Wow. Love talking with a fellow nerd. This is a lot of fun.
Yes.
All
Yeah,
right,
if you
now
want to over time, if you just want to transition this into a Naruto podcast, you'll probably get a lot more listeners. I'll come back for that too.
let's do it. All right. I know time's getting a little short for you, so I just actually wanted to give you the time to open up the floor to ask you what you're currently working on and anything you're excited about or any news that's coming up.
Yeah, so a few things. Like if we, well, one, I'm um, I'm always trying to just think about how can I be a better husband and father, even
Hmm.
though like I can't pull the time lever right now, or if I did, I'd need to drop some other things in life.
Right.
So it's two discussions. Like I'm having to have these like really tough discussions with myself and with people like my boss, my team, etc., and just try to figure out are there ways to reallocate time? And there's no easy answers there. And I just want to be open about that because anyone who goes on the parenting journey,
Hmm.
like so many parents just hide it at work and try to make it look like, well, I have everything together, so give me a raise and promotion. Like I don't think that's the way forward because if you look at the rates of burnout in the workplace right now, it's not working for so many people. And if it's not working for the people, the so I'll give a for other people who work in large companies, the warning I'll give is because I'm open with my mental health and how I'm feeling and my struggles, others sometimes they'll open up, but sometimes they'll seek me out specifically and open up just to me.
Hmm.
So I have a pretty good set of data points. The people who do that, they're some of your highest performing people because you lean on them the hardest. So I'm like, hey, if we don't systemically fix this, like these systems will collapse because you'll take out your best people. And if that happens, you are effed. And then from there, it's like your, you know, talented but not as effective people pick up the load. Your business is going to slow down and you're going to burn them out because they can't do what your highest performers did. And then it just cascades from there. And I'm just watching that happen over and over and over. So that's one thing. So for me, I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to be very open about it to stop these cascades from happening. Two, I have early in the year, I went hard on trying to generate some leads for public speaking,
Hmm.
teaching workshops on mental health. I don't have a lot of free time, so I didn't have a lot of slots to do this. Um, it didn't take very long for me to fill up the slots on my speaking calendar pretty much till the end of the year. So I'm like, okay, like with 1 hour a week of reaching out to leads, we got that done in less than a month. Like, okay. So now I'm trying to think about this work. It doesn't pay the bills for me like my day job, but it's very aligned with my mission of trying to create positive change in the world. Like what I really want to do is bring up the next generation of purpose-driven leaders, because like I want to change the world, but I'm getting older and I'm starting to see all the ways that I don't think I'm going to get the job done. So like I got to powerfully pass the baton to the next generation and make sure that they're way better than I ever was. And that's how the world's going to get better. So I'm trying to find ways like, okay, I filled up the public speaking and workshop calendar, and that's like, let's say 80% full for the year. Like that's not going to scale. What else can I do? And so I have to think about like, do I want to start some sort of like content production work stream where it could be YouTube, could be more podcasts, it could be doing something different on Instagram. Do I want to start e-courses? And if I do e-courses, like I'm like, how am I going to generate leads? Like, do I start the content business? Do I get into email marketing? And then I'm like, and if you remember where we started, I said I don't have a lot of time. So I'm like mulling all this over and trying to figure out how to grow, a side hustle like many of the entrepreneurs who might be listening to this.
Sure.
While also holding on to this job I love, while also trying to be the best dad I can. And then I compete at Powerlifting Nationals in September. And then in a different federation, I compete at their Worlds in November. So there's that going on too.
Wow. Well, I have no doubt that you're going to find a way to tie it all together and get your goals done, whether it's you could start streaming out while you're waiting in between your powerlifting meets or whatever. Like, you find what you can do, right? But
I have signed deals for real estate or real estate paperwork.
Yeah.
In between, like in the middle of powerlifting competitions. Like,
there you go.
Do you find a way? You get it done.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Newton. It was a blast talking with you. I'm glad we got to get real and actually talk about stuff that matters and that not many people are willing to. So thank you for being brave and helping lead the way for young people who are struggling.
Thomas, happy to do it. And if you ever go in the Naruto direction, I think we could do a whole episode on the philosophy of Might Guy and Rock Lee, and how that would probably speak to all the entrepreneurs that don't believe in themselves.
That can be a side quest. I'm willing to take that on with you.
Hell yeah. All right.
Nice.
To be continued.
To be continued. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Take care, Newton. Thank you.
Thank you.